Welcome to Engage on the Go. I'm Judy Maggio. A priority for Leadership Austin is to increase civic engagement by convening even more people in critical community conversations. We know not everyone's available for our monthly Engage Breakfast, so we're bringing these panel discussions to you through this Engage on the Go series. Our hope is to encourage a thoughtful dialogue about a community issue at a time and place that works for you. We want to thank our presenting sponsor, University Federal Credit Union, who's helping us bring these series of discussions to where we live, work, and play.
Hello, my name is Tony Boudet. I'm CEO of University Federal Credit Union. We're proud to partner with Leadership Austin as presenting sponsor of Engage on the Go. We hope this series sparks thoughtful, respectful dialogues at a time and place that work best for you.
According to a recent report from the Texas Judicial Council, 1 million Texans experience serious mental illness in a given year. 1.6 million Texans have substance use disorders. The cost to emergency rooms and the justice system in Texas to address mental illness and substance use problems is $2 billion. 20 to 24% of Texas inmates have mental health needs. 70% of youth in the Texas juvenile justice system have some form of mental health need. What is mental health from a clinical perspective?
Mental health is the ability to feel comfortable in your relationships at home, comfortable with your friendships, feeling like you're doing okay in your work environment, and then also the resiliency that when stress happens, bad things happen, to cope with that without deteriorating and then getting back to your life as the way it was before.
We often get asked the question, so what's normal? I think we still, because we don't have any really great diagnostic tools, so often what we have to pay attention is to the way that we're feeling and interacting. And so when we talk about normal, we often tell people to pay attention to a couple of things. One is severity and the other one is persistence. How severe are the feelings that you're having, the signs and symptoms that are telling you things just aren't going too well? How severe are they? Are they severe enough that they're impairing your daily function, your ability to be able to live, laugh, and love, right? I think that's a really good one. And then the other is just the persistence, because I often say, you know, it's one thing to be in a funk. We all get in a funk sometimes. Things aren't going well, and we might have a week of that, or maybe even two. But when that persists and it goes beyond that, then that's something that we should probably be paying attention to. So I think those are really two great markers for people to use for themselves.
I think the challenge is that it presents differently with everyone. It's an individual journey, and so you're going to see different symptoms, maybe even under the same classification. So it really has to be an individualized treatment at that point too. And I think that can be challenging for doctors and also for the person who's trying to seek out maybe what the problem is and get an answer to what's going on in their life.
What are some of the misconceptions of mental health?
When I first got started in the mental health field, I grew up in a town that really didn't have a lot of mental health services. And so even after grad school, I don't think that I had really understood that recovery exists, that people can have a severe mental illness and still live a very robust life and go into very competitive fields. And that was just not talked about even in my grad school program, of this idea that, you know, with the right support system, that people could go on to careers that, you know, being doctors, being attorneys, being, you know, competitive fields. And I think that that's a really important thing to bring into the conversation, that, you know, with the right supports, people can live very fulfilling lives. I think we hear the other side in the news a lot of the people, you know, seeing homelessness, and that we see mental illness linked with crime a lot, even though that people with mental illness, living with mental illness, are much more likely to be the victims than the perpetrators. But that's a line of dialogue that I think we hear far too often. So kind of switching and really talking about the recovery side and getting supports and living a fulfilling life is an important dialogue, I think.
Big change that's occurring is based in the research that demonstrates that these disorders, even though there's behaviors that are associated and there's ways of interacting that are associated, the research is starting to be very clear that these are brain-based disorders, and they're brain-based disorders that have an underlying basis in genetics. And so I think what has to happen is realizing that even though these disorders often look like something that somebody ought to be able to just pull themselves together or move on, that the sorts of disorders that are getting people into jails or getting people to homelessness actually have a basis in their genes and in their brain.
I think most people don't realize that mental illness looks like each one of us. And I think that was true for myself in the sense that I didn't think, especially since I grew up with a mother with an undiagnosed and untreated mental illness throughout her life, I did all of the right things in terms of taking care of my family, Sunday school teacher, PTA mom, all those things. And so I really felt like I had created this bubble of protection. I thought somehow if I did all of those things, mental illness wouldn't step into my life. And the reality is I still encounter people when I'm in the community that hear my story and say, I would have never thought that about you. You look like you have the perfect family. I do have the perfect family. They just happen to have mental illness. And so I think that's part of it, is recognizing that with numbers like 1 in 5, here in this room, in our workplaces, in the pews that we sit in our places of worship, in our schools, are people living with mental health issues. And so often they're having to do it isolated in silence because we still live in a community that doesn't understand exactly what Dr. Baker just said, right? That these are brain, biological based, often genetic, as I know in my own family.
How can we equate mental health and physical health in the same way?
I was thinking about how important the early identification is, and a lot of the literature, particularly with severe mental illnesses, is demonstrating that early intervention really impacts the prognosis down the line. So it's important, I think, and also in terms of helping with stigma, that we work about how to get identification of these disorders occurring in the primary care setting. How do we get, in particular, pediatricians working with adolescents to think about these disorders? It's reminding me of, through the school, Dean Johnston at the medical school is really invested in making sure that psychiatry isn't a separate clinic from the rest of the clinics, but is instead embedded into every single clinic that the medical school starts. And one of the strategies related to that is how then do we make sure that those primary care docs who don't have a lot of time have the tools to make these early diagnoses and interventions. So we're trying to develop real simple screening tools that the nurse, when you walk in, can ask, just like she takes your temperature, or he takes your temperature, or takes your height and weight. We'll ask about suicide, we'll ask about depression, we'll ask about trauma in your life, and ask about substance use, which is another big issue.
Early screening for mental illness is really important, but also finding ways to integrate physical and mental health even after someone has been diagnosed is critical, because we know that people with severe mental illness die on average decades earlier than the general population, and that's really because of preventable physical health, heart disease, diabetes. And so what we see is a lot of people who have severe mental illness going into emergency rooms a lot because they don't have primary care access. And so a lot of what the Clubhouse does is link our membership to the community at large, so making sure that they have physical primary care doctors. We also bring a lot of the care in. We have community care clinic come in and provide physical exams. We have immunization clinics come in quarterly for shots. Anything to make that link between mental health and physical health more seamless. And also because insurance is hard to come by, so sometimes it's hard to connect with a doctor. The overall mission of the Clubhouse is really to link people back to the community at large. So getting people who have oftentimes spent a lot of time kind of cycling in and out of the mental health system back into the community. And so some of the big things we work on are housing. We work on making sure that they do have primary care. And then also employment. That's the #1 express goal of our membership. is to go back to work. So we do a lot of pre-vocational skills training, and then we partner with employers in the Austin community to place our members. So that's, employment has been proven to really help in people's recovery, which that's a big shift from where we were decades ago, where people said, oh, you have this diagnosis, you will never work again. But now what we've really found is work and that feeling of pride of being able to go back, the structure of work, the community of work, those are all fabulous things for people's recovery and really aid them in staying well.
What are current resources being offered to help people with mental illness?
And so much of the work that we do is around the education and the support piece for families and individuals. So we provide all kinds of free classes and support groups so people can get the education and support that they need on that road to recovery so that they're far more confident and resilient. But then the other piece that we're doing is really then being out in the community. So for instance, in the last couple of years, we've provided education to more than 10,000 middle school and high school teens, educating them on what the early signs and symptoms look like, what to do if you're worried about yourself or a friend, talking about the question of suicide and how do you know? I mean, we know that in spite of the fact that we'd like not to think that we have kids as young as 10 years old dying from suicide, they do. And so how important that education piece is. And then we're in workplaces and also faith communities. We're actually just about to launch a 3-hour training that we can provide for faith leaders.
Austin has, through the Integral Care Through the Community Center, a lot of neat integrated in that regard programs within the schools where it's easy for school counselors and school teachers to reach out to clinicians that work with this center and get help on site or get them linked up with a clinic pretty easily.
NAMI Austin is also doing a whole lot of work in this arena. As I mentioned, we provide a very short 15-minute presentation that we can do in all kinds of school settings, but we've also done them for youth ministry programs and other kinds of places where it's just again, an introduction. It's a mental health awareness program for teens. We also provide education for teachers and school professionals. And then we have a great 6-week course called Basics that's specifically for parents and caregivers who have early onset of, they may not even have a diagnosis. When you've got a child that's 10 and you just see that there's challenges going on, it's a great class to take. I really firmly believe that part of what we can do to really help ensure that young people get the help that they need is to, again, make sure that you're impacting and educating our pediatricians, but also the schools and the school professionals, the kids themselves, and then also the parents.
Yeah, so a lot of what Austin Clubhouse does is actually partner with local employers to help our memberships get back into work. And so, for example, we have a partnership with Wheatsville, and they hold 2 positions for our Clubhouse members, and our staff actually goes in and trains for those positions and then comes back and chooses a member that's ready to work, that might not have the skill set yet but is eager to get back into work. And so our staff will train that person and stay with them. But I think what's been amazing is we have 2 of our members hired full-time there, and it's because Wheatsville got to see how competent and what great workers they were. And so it gave them this partnership that we had with them, really gave them kind of a example that, wow, these people might have this certain diagnosis, but they're still a fantastic employee.
Austin Clubhouse and NAMI aren't the only ones. There's some great resources in our community, and there's just too many people that don't know that they exist. So we sort of see ourselves as the best source in Austin for all of that information, for resources. If you know someone who doesn't know where to turn and has questions and is looking for sliding scale counseling and doesn't know who to call, they can call us.
What are actionable items we can do to erase the stigma of mental health?
So if you want an action thing that you can do, one of them is to advocate for the kinds of bills that are in place right now that will help increase our workforce shortage, so that we'll address that. If you go to our website at namiaustin.org, we have an advocacy tab that's specifically for the 85th legislative session, and it's a list of all the bills that are related to mental health that we're supporting and the numbers and all of that, as well as some great tools for advocating. I firmly believe that each one of us, you're here today, you've got the information. If you have friends and family that live in rural areas, if you are in those communities where people still don't know and still are kind of stuck in some of those myths, you have the opportunity to say, hey, I just went to this great breakfast and this is what I learned. I think each of us is tasked with helping to change people's perspective on this particular health issue.
I want to make a pitch for destigmatizing treatment for substance use services and seeing this as a brain disorder as well. Only 3% of the need in Texas for substance abuse treatment is met financially in the public sector. And there's good literature that suggests that if we would invest in substance abuse services, the cost offset in the jails and judicial system alone would far offset it. So to continue to be an advocate for making sure that this other brain-based disorder is adequately treated as well.
I'm a big believer that language is powerful, and it's a very simplistic thing, but I think changing our language and the way we use language, we still talk about people as he's a schizophrenic or he's bipolar. And so changing that language so that we understand that people live with schizophrenia, they may have a diagnosis of schizophrenia, but they are not schizophrenia. People are not their illnesses anymore.
I would encourage everyone to advocate on behalf of making sure that mental health is included in insurances, because really without the access to medication and care, you're going to see a lot of people spiral to places that they never had to go down to. Just they can't get the health care that they need. And I think that includes Medicaid, just making sure that we have a robust Medicaid system that will really ensure recovery for people who could lead very, very healthy lives if we just had supports available.
We hope you found this edition of Engage on the Go helpful. Greater Austin is a diverse, rapidly growing region, facing issues that will certainly shape this place we call home. Please enjoy your conversation, and thank you for caring enough to share your perspectives with each other.